Diary, I have a question that needs to be answered. If Mekhi Phifer was dating Brandy and Monica in the Boy's Mind video, who exactly was he cheating on? I mean, he had to be dating one of them first. And why was he dumb enough to date two women who live next door to each other? We saw the video, the walls were about as thick as a shower curtain. He really thought he could be able to walk around and not get caught in their apartment? My guy is not too bright. I guess that's why Cameron caught him slipping and paid in full. We need to do better. E to the D to the cuz. What up, players? Thank you for joining me for another edition of the Soul and Stereo Sessions. And if you couldn't already tell from Mo to the E to the, today we are talking about Brandy. Yep, and we are ranking her entire discography. So my connection with Brandy is a little interesting. So I remember when social media was popping off, late 2000s, early 2010s, I was very shocked to see how passionate, I'll use that word, her fan base was. Because for my generation growing up, we love Brandy. Brandy is our age. Brandy, Monica, Aaliyah, they were all part of that same group of young artists. Usher too, who kind of came in and were taking the genre to the next level. But even though we liked her, she was always still a little second tier to the legends. And by no means did we ever underrate her great work. I mean, we had the Moesha TV show. We had the Cinderella movie. Look, if y'all think Beyonce is overexposed now, you should have seen Brandy in the late 90s. She was America's sweetheart. She was everywhere. A lot of the girls in my class were tired of her because she was everywhere. But she had some incredible albums and incredible music to go along with it. That said, we saw her as great, but we never saw her as top tier. However, when social media came along and the generation behind us had more of a voice, Brandy is their Whitney Houston. She is the epitome. And that threw me at first until I understood for that generation, yes, she is the best because she is their introduction to quality vocals, to this top tier level of performance. Brandy is pretty much unmatched among most of her peers. And when you look at it from that lens, I can understand those millennials being like, those younger millennials being like, she's the best. Kind of can't hate on that because when you look at her quality of vocals, they call it a vocal Bible for a reason. She's in a class among herself. But today, we're going to look at those albums and see how they stack up. Ranking them from bottom to top. But first, you know what it is. This is your opportunity to hit like on this video before it even gets started because I promise you, you're going to like it. Trust me, you're going to have a lot to talk about on this one. Also, make sure if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. Help your boy out. If you like this content, 90s R&B, 2000s R&B, 2010s R&B, current day R&B, and hip-hop as well, this is the place you need to be in. So hit that subscribe button. And when we're done, make sure you share it with the Brandy fan in your life because I'm sure they're going to have lots of thoughts too. So come on with me. It's time to talk Brandy. Coming in at number 7 is Brandy's most recent album, B7. And I'm sure about 60% of the people watching this video just turned it off now because B7 is at the bottom. But for the 40% that remain, let me explain to you why this album is at the bottom of the list. Look, you can call me a hater, but I always have reasons for my hating. The thing that I like about this album is that when it comes to the vocal performances, it is absolutely pristine. If you are a vocal coach and you need an album to show these youngins that you are trying to coach in the skill of artistry today, you might be pretty good using this album. You might be well served using this as a template. But as we know, there's more to music than just having pitch perfect vocals and pitch perfect performances. The thing is lacking from this album, while there are some songs I really like. No Tomorrow never left rotation. Love that song. The production doesn't do it for me. The writing doesn't always do it for me. And when you look at the top tier albums on this list, that's a given. Like Brandy always has great production, always has great writing. This album is just missing that. It has everything in place for a great listening experience, except the production, except some of the lyricism. Some of the songs kind of mush the same because we got that old vibey sound that kind of gets on my nerves. I don't understand exactly what we were going for on this album, and I think that's why it falls a little bit short. Of course, it has its fans, like every Brandy project that you will ever think of, but for me, no, this one's at the bottom of the list. Coming in at number 6 is 211. This album has a mixed reception, and I get it because it's a mixed album. I really like some of the songs on this album. Wildest Dreams, low key, is one of my favorite Brandy songs ever, even though it's not mentioned very much. And I like that she's showing so much energy, and you can tell she's having fun on this album. And that's kind of one thing that B7 was missing that I really enjoyed here. That said, this album can be the highest of highs and the lowest of lows. There's a lot of some so-so filler here, some stuff that doesn't quite connect all the dots. And again, for a Brandy project, that's kind of rare. So it has its great points. This album definitely has its defenders. I'm sure you'll see them in the comments. And in some ways, I'm a defender. I don't think this album is nearly as bad as the reception was in 2011. Thought the album was alright. But there are many albums that are better, and it's shaky because at the end of the day, it's a little shaky. That's why the reception is what it is. Alright, coming in at number 5 is Human. And if you were around back in the day, you know how much hype this album had. And it was all because it was the return of Darkchild. Darkchild was coming back behind the boards. Rodney Jerkins and Brandy were like this unbelievable duo back in the late 90s. He kind of helped perfect her sound and really took her to the next level with some albums we'll get to later on. So him returning to the scene was like, okay, Brandy is going back to this return of prominence. We gonna get the old Brandy back. We get 1998 Brandy back. But we kind of didn't. If I can say one thing about this album, it felt too safe. Whereas in 1998, their partnership was kind of taking things to another level and branching out her sound and just moving her into adulthood in so many ways. We would get Brandy was very young then. This album was just so regular, for the lack of a better word. It's a solid album. There's a lot to like about the album, but then there's just a lot of forgettable stuff, to the fact that most people even forget this album even exists because there's just not a lot there. Everything that we were excited for, we were looking for something new, and especially in R&B at the time, we were dying for something new and exciting. We just kind of got like a regular old R&B album, and that's just not something a Brandy fan would be excited about. It has its moments for sure, but it's definitely not one that most people will return to. Alright, now we get into the good stuff. We're in at number 4 with Brandy and her 1994 debut. It's weird to have this album so low on the list when it's so regarded. And don't get me wrong, this is a great album, and its low ranking just shows how great the albums are that came after it. This, as a debut, was stirring. This is actually one of the first CDs I've ever owned. It's back there somewhere. It's one of the probably the first 3 or 4 albums I ever purchased with my own money because I loved it so much. Brandy definitely reflected our experiences in the 90s. Again, she's my age. She was talking about the 90s culture and themes of the time. She had that innocence going, but also had a little bit of sass to her. Like she had some sweetness, but she wasn't afraid to tell it like it is. It's something that really related to and resonated with our era of fandom. But not only that, we had some hits. A lot of those hits got played to death, for sure. But they are hits that continue to endure today. Plus, you know, she gave us... You can't hate on whatever that weird hand signal thing was. It's like a reverse bird flying, but we were all rocking that in the 90s. This album has so many nostalgic memories for me, filled with great songs. Objectively, it's not perfect. It definitely has a few songs that could have been left off. But as an overall debut, this was very strong and a great thing, a great showcase for things to come. Coming in at number 3 is Afro DJC. This is another one of those surprise albums that I never thought we would get, but when we got it, I was like, yes. So Brandy, remember, is coming off of that big run with Dark Child, and she's looking for a new sound. So who does she go to? She goes to VA, like you always do when you want quality in your life. Go to them VA boys. She went to Timbaland, and Timbaland helped give her a new revised sound. I remember an interview in the early 2000s, around the time this album was being made, and Tim was like, man, I can't wait for y'all to hear this album. I got her sounding so ghetto. And it was so ridiculous. They're like, what? This is not really the way you pictured Brandy at the time. But really, that kind of attitude was really prevalent in this album. And when you get mid-2000s Timbaland on the beats, you know you got some heat. This album was very, very fun, a very different Brandy, but a needed Brandy because it gave her much more maturity into her sound. To be honest though, some people push back against this album. I've seen some people who don't like it because of the direction. They think it was a little bit too much. Maybe feels like she's playing too much of a character and not being herself. But I think that's just a reflection of her maturing. People will still think of Brandy as little old sweet little girl Moesha Brandy or the girl from the Thea TV show. But they aren't realizing this is a 20-year-old woman at this point, so she's going to have more mature themes and be more spoken for herself. And that's what we got in this album. Personally, this is my favorite Brandy album, but I can't objectively say that it's her best album because there's better stuff to come. Some people think it's her best. I don't quite agree, but to me, it's the most fun. Alright, coming in at number 2, it's an album some people say is her best, but I guess I say it's her second best if it's at number 2, and that's Full Moon. So, think of Brandy again as we've been discussing about her evolution over the years. So, she's had her incredible debut, she's had her sophomore effort. How can she rebrand herself for album number 3? Because she's at a crossroads at this time. She's beyond the TV show. She has the whole rumors about was she pregnant and that was a whole thing. Was she pregnant? Was she married? Blah, blah, blah. We figured out later on. Yeah, she got a baby. But at the end of the day, this was about a maturing, grown woman Brandy. And that's what we got here. Full Moon is exactly what B7 tried to do, except successfully. It is a marriage of incredible vocal prowess, along with some great songwriting and some great production. To this day, my favorite Brandy song is the title track. Still stands up today, but there's other great songs here, and that's elevated because of the production and because of the writing. I'm not falling asleep on this one. But if you also want to look at the technical performances of the actual singing on this joint, She got you. She was named the Vocal Bible because of this album right here. The techniques used are mind-blowing, and to believe that someone still relatively young was able to carry this off is why people were putting her up there with Whitney Houston. Just an incredible performance, song after song after song, and one of the defining R&B albums from that era. When you hear my generation talking about, oh, they don't make R&B like they used to, this is one of those albums. This is absolutely one of those, because you have storytelling on the songs, passionate performances, not someone just sleepwalking, reading Instagram lyrics and humming over them. Like, you can tell her passion through each song, through each performance. This album is an absolute standout. I can't put it number one because there are a couple songs that are kind of snoozy to me, but overall this is great. And if you're compiling a list of the best R&B albums of the 2000s, this one got to be pretty high on the list. But number one, still to come. And we're here in at number one, Brandy's Never Say Never. Again, I know some of y'all will argue and say Full Moon is the best, but to me, nah, this is by far Brandy's best project. I always brag about the year 1998 and how it was the last great year for R&B and hip hop. And it's not that we didn't have great years following, we did, but just the level of quality across the board. We were literally getting classic albums every single week, and this is an example of a classic album that just randomly showed up one day, and then we got another classic from somebody else 3 weeks later. That's how 1998 was built. To me, this is the definitive Brandy album. Sophomore album, she was able to evolve from the young girl image, and while she still had retained her youthfulness here, she didn't get into the maturity that she would get in Afro DJC and Full Moon later on, but she was still able to have that closeness to her fan base that, I guess you can call it not immaturity, but you can call it maybe not naivety, but there's a curiousness in her relationship. She just had herself open. She was willing to open herself up and realize that the world around her ain't always the best place, but she can be open enough to tell those stories. She hadn't gotten jaded yet. That's the word I was missing. That's dope. And the album, of course, excels because of Rodney Jerkins doing his thing. He was at the height of his powers. Production's incredible. The writing is great. And honestly, the songs I like the least are probably the singles. The album cuts, put that on everything. The title track, oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. I need to just pull this thing out right now. An incredible release. Another one of the best albums of that era. If you're looking at the 90s, one of the best eras of R&B of all time. I mean, we've got the 70s, that's number one. The 90s, I put it number two. And this album is among the top 10 or 15 of those best R&B albums of that era. That's how strong it is. A great release, a great representation of what Brandy would become. And when those youngsters would come up and be like, this is the greatest singer of our generation, and they point to this album, man, I can't hate. They're on something. The best Brandy album. I know you're going to say why I didn't give it 5 stars, because it's just this close from 5-star category, but no doubt one of the best albums of the era. That's it, y'all. Every Brandy album to date ranked from bottom to top. I know y'all got some opinions on this one, so jump in the comments. Let me know which albums you prefer, which ones you think need to be higher, which ones need to be lower. You can scream at me about B7 because I know that's coming. Just keep it cool. Keep it PG in the comments, please. That's all I ask. Ugh. I got to get back to writing in my diary. So this edition of the Soul and Stereo Sessions is a wrap. I'll see y'all later. I'm about to play Never Say Never. Play on, players.